All right, so to be respectful of everyone's time, let's go ahead and start. And we want to welcome you to Beyond the Classroom. That is the title of our roundtable today. Beyond the Classroom, Bridging the Gap with Interpretation and Translations. We have with me today three wonderful ladies that will be sharing their expertise and most likely answering also some of your questions. I would like to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Catherine Adames, Director of Interpreting Operations. But before all of that, I am a Spanish interpreter, my favorite title, and I will allow the ladies to introduce themselves. Liz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Liz. I am a language access expert with Effectiff. But before that, I was a sign language interpreter and I was a deaf education teacher for many years. I taught high school and I taught pre-K. I also have a lot of experience volunteering in the deaf community and just in general have heart for it. It's great to see everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Liz. Trisha?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Trisha Harding. I'm coming to you from Southwest Washington on the West Coast. Work in a school district as the language access coordinator and have years of working in either nonprofit or education supporting vulnerable populations and students.
Thank you, Trisha. Dr. Sparacello?
I am Leslie Sparacello, and I'm coming to you from the great state of Texas. Here in Austin, I am a 35-year educator, and now I am currently the superintendent of Cedars International, which is a charter district.
Thank you so much. Okay, so today we're going to explore how interpretation and translation services go far beyond the classroom and how they play a vital role in building trust, fostering equity, and ensuring all students and family have access to the information and support that they need. So we want to thank you once again for joining us. I'm already seeing your comments and your notes on here, and we would go ahead and start with our first subject of discussion today. Ladies, you're welcome to take on to respond as you wish. Okay, so what strategies can schools use to evaluate the effectiveness of their language access programs, especially when it comes to both interpretation and translation services? Don't be shy.
I would actually.
Wonderful.
Doctor?
Well, what I was going to say is, one of the things that I've done at all the districts that I've been at is just monitoring student progress by special population. So looking at how the overall group is doing, but then also looking at the scores and the performance and the growth of students who are getting special services. Because that's a way, if there's a gap, our goal is always to close that gap. And so anytime we're monitoring any student progress, we're not just looking at that overall number because it can sometimes camouflage where students who need extra support are not getting the support that they need. And so that's one of our main strategies.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz.
Yeah, I just to mention what Dr. Spiracello just said, I love that idea of looking at the big picture. We're not just looking at that child's scores. We're looking at the whole child. And I think that's something that's super important in education because we're all so different. We don't know exactly where these kids have come from. We don't know what they're experiencing inside and outside of school on a daily basis. So looking at the big picture, I think, is really important. But what I was going to say is that, a really good way to evaluate the interpretation and translation services that your school is using is it being used? Is it being utilized? Are you seeing that, okay, you have a new vendor with a streamlined platform that makes everything so easy. It's so easy to reach out to these parents. It's so easy to connect with someone to do a translation. And you're seeing that the usage went from here to here. That's a good sign. That means that your staff understands how to use the tools that they have and that they are taking advantage of it. And another thing that I was going to mention is parent involvement. right? When I was a teacher, the biggest thing they were always talking about is how do we get these parents to be more involved, to show up when we have a carnival night for elementary school, to, volunteer to be on the PTA, to be a part of something in the school. How do we do that? And that was always a huge goal in the district that I worked in, was get those parents involved. We want them to feel invested in their child's education. And one way to look at that is to look at that information and say, okay, we do have parents that speak another language participating in these events. They're coming. That's awesome. That is a perfect start to, and like I said, like Doctor said, the whole child is the real evaluation, that whole child experience. But some of those things can be parent involvement, can be faculty usage of the programs. And, like you said, evaluating all of the progress across the board, not just test scores.
Thank you so much, Liz. Tricia?
Yeah, agree with all of that. My role as language access coordinator is under the family engagement umbrella. My focus is on how we create ways to ensure meaningful two-way communication between our schools and our families. And so thinking about in the stage that I'm at in implementation is a lot what Liz was saying. It's a new system, it's a scheduling system, and the use is improving. And we are filling almost nearly every request that we have for an interpreter. And so that is showing our progress. What I'd like to be able to do more is have some specific evaluations on surveys from families, which we push out after they're in a meeting with an interpreter, just to ensure that we have quality interpretation and translation. And that's sort of next level. We get maybe 5% back right now. So looking at ways to get that information, a little more micro kind of level data on how we're doing once we have the interpreter there.
Tricia, just a quick question to piggyback off of what you just said. So you have these surveys that you send out at the end of a meeting to see how things went with the interpreter. Do you ever provide that feedback back to the agencies that you're working with, or the service providers that you guys are contracting with?
Yeah, in my case, we use the interpreters from the vendor that created our online scheduling system. And so they have access to those results. So parents, the interpreter, and the staff in the meeting all have an opportunity to respond. And often the interpreter is the one, making suggestions for how I can help support our staff to be more prepared to have interpreters.
That is awesome. Yeah.
I think you guys have mentioned main points here, and I want to probably just go a little bit into those details. I think I heard Liz talking about something similar to maybe data driven. We want to see the usage of the interpreting services. And from our perspective in operations, we've seen the difference that this makes. We have a large school district that, like Liz said, grew the usage just because they understood the difference between on-site and virtual services. And they found that virtual services was more convenient for them to use. On-site, wonderful service that we offer. But for example, school nurses need to call their parents and they don't have a staff interpreter. They would go ahead and use the over the phone only service. Or if you want, just go ahead and use the video remote interpreting, which is sort of the same thing and cost effective. And then that is also part of data-driven usage tracking, like Liz said, quality assurance. So it is so important for an interpreter to know that you guys consider, meaning the users, consider that they've done a good job. And we also have been able to implement that, and we found it very successful. And the fact that not only the users are able to, let's say, rate their encounter, but also the interpreters is important. Sometimes we have received complaints from the school because of misinterpretation, and we get a feedback from the interpreter that says that there was an issue on the line.
Yeah.
So there we are intervening and making the school know, letting the school know that in reality there was not really an issue with the interpretation. It was just that the lines were not the best or the internet was not the best. And it allows us time to kind of work around the service that we have provided. And also, we have seen students kind of being the voice of their parents. And I think that has changed a lot in the last few years in our country, in the sense of, sometimes every time we would hear that someone was from Guatemala, Ecuador, Mexico, you would think they spoke Spanish. And we will see children advocating for their parents and saying, hey, my parent, if they're able to speak English, of course, this is not the language that we speak. And it does help the school to create a list of other languages that they thought were not needed. And in reality, they are needed for servicing the schools. I'm not sure if any of you ladies mentioned anything about translations, but I would say that we have seen translation being a very large part of the breaking the barrier when it comes to education, making sure that the parents are able to see with the IEPs or with the school communication what is going on in the school. It's not just over the phone. The fact that they're able to receive notifications of activities, I think it has definitely made a great change in our industry, in your industry of education. All right, ladies.
Oh, sorry. Were you going to move on? I was just going to make the connection between translation and interpretation. Often I get requests for translation about activities or events. And some of the work that we're doing in our systems development is saying, great job. So happy to see you getting this translated. Now, did you need an interpreter for that event, or vice versa? So sometimes it's kind of checking the boxes of getting it done, but then not thinking about how they'll support those families when they do show up, since we've promoted it to them. So trying to make that connection when I see either interpretation or translation requests, and it looks like one is going to follow the other.
Yes, definitely. We've seen a growth in, and also we have, and I keep saying we, but I'm talking out of my experience in operations. We have continuous meetings with our school districts, and they have mentioned to us that because of maybe rare languages we are able to offer on-site or virtual, and also having the ability to translate these rare languages and send it to the parents, or sometimes just hearing from the language service provider that maybe there's not really a written translation for that language, but that we're able to assist you in communicating. It makes a great difference. Anything else you ladies would want to add? All right, so let's move on to our second question here. I love this one, actually. What kind of training best equips school staff to collaborate effectively with interpreters and use translated materials to support multilingual students and families? I'll let Trisha take on that one.
Oh, thank you. I'm still trying to figure this out here, but I will say that I have taken my role as language access coordinator in this sort of customer service approach. And so each time I get a request or I have an opportunity to speak to one of our school staff, we're also a large district with 38 schools. That's my training opportunity. And so I help them through the process. I take my opportunities to fit in little bits of information about what they're doing and how it could potentially be done differently or better. And then the other way that I've found is short videos. If I can push out something short and it can go out to the admin of the buildings and they can share it in a staff meeting, I can't get to all 38 buildings. So I'm trying to do little small doses of things because our educators are so overwhelmed with requests and so much PD is happening all the time that I'm trying to sort of just slowly do it as I get opportunities to talk to staff and be as supportive as possible so that they know that they don't have to do it themselves, that we can support them. And what happens then is that I get requests for training. So I get invited to meetings at different schools and I get invited by different people in the building than the admin because they want all of their teams to know the information.
And I think you're doing a wonderful thing just by educating and making sure everyone is aware of how and when maybe to use.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. I just like to jump in on that just because as an educator myself, I know when it came time for those faculty meetings, everybody, let's go. We're going to meet in the library. We're going to sit down and we've got 5 different people showing us 5 different things. And then we also have, our school reps coming up and they have to talk to us about the change in insurance and, this, that, and the other. Did I retain any of it? I'm not sure. So I love the small snippet idea.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like in my experience working with clients from this side, rather than being a teacher, but from this side, working with those clients, everyone's an information overload. Yeah. You don't have anything left. If you send a small snippet, or what I was going to say, providing a demo so they can see exactly what we're talking about. Because when you say VRI, OPI, OSI, it's like alphabet soup. Education is already alphabet soup. Now you've added in a bunch of stuff that has to do with language. It can be too much. So showing them exactly what it looks like, what it can do, and you're just like, I can't believe that I have this right at my fingertips, that I can make connections with these parents without having to go find somebody to translate this little letter that I want to send home to my student in their notebook. It's just really nice to be able to show them the options and what they have.
Thank you so much, Liz. Doctor?
Yeah, I would add to that click sheets, or what we call click sheets. Whenever especially if you're using some sort of device that is a very quick visual with a diagram of 1, 2, 3. People are very visual these days. And so if they can see a picture of it and then a little description of step 1, step 2, step 3, like really breaking it down Barney style, if you will, is really kind of what is helpful. I mean, just making sure that there's training to start with, right? Like we make a lot of assumptions in education. We'll hand people something and just like, there you go. And not every device, not every app, not every strategy that we use is just intuitive. And so making sure that people understand, having people get their hands on things and do it with you in a guided fashion prior to actually going out on their own is always good. Because I'll be the first one like, yeah, I got it. I'm busy here. I got it. Let me run off and I'll figure it out. And then you get into it and then you're like, oh my goodness, I don't got it. So, just really ensuring that you're setting people up for success, right? That you're making sure they have a clear understanding. And when they go out there, their first experience is going to be good because, imprinting is very important. How I imprint to something, my first impression of something is super important. And so just making sure that first experience is stellar. And then that way, they are like, oh, I just want to, do it again, like, because it was so easy.
Thank you so much. We've seen many of our clients kind of add, when onboarding happens with their staff, they add on to how to use an interpreter. So they will not only teach or show their staff members when they join that there are protocols and roles that the interpreters may have. They would also let them know that there are different types of interpretation. And I think one of the smallest yet biggest part of the education for the staff is making sure they understand the difference between interpreting and translating, so that they know when they make a request or when they have a need, which of the two they should ask for. So easily explained, right? And then I think we forget how important it is to talk about culture. We are dealing with so many cultures in our country that maybe adding a little bit of that to our staff training, or just making them understand that, not the same way that us in the US react to certain things, someone in the Dominican Republic or Mexico will react to the same thing. I remember vividly, and I don't think I would ever forget this, that when I was being trained to be an interpreter, there was a case that there was just make believe. Of course, I'm not violating HIPAA or anything like that. There was a patient from Mexico, supposedly, and they were praying to the god of death. And so when we were going back and forth, the doctor was very surprised as to what that they were praying to. And so there we had to explain culturally what that was. So I think maybe explaining also a little bit of culture is great. And the law. Why are interpreters and translators so important? So maybe three little points of information that we're able to add, just small snippets. I like that idea too, and I think we may use it to send out to our clients instead of probably sending large amount of information, just small amounts of that for them to read or see as part of what we do. Okay, so let me go. Dr. Joseph here says, I truly appreciate the comprehensive efforts of the entire team. Thank you all. A special thanks to Dr. Sparacello for humbly sharing her wealth of experience and inspiring some of our overwhelmed educators in what they do. My question is, how do you coordinate and brainstorm so effectively to consistently uplift support others in all that you do? Wow. I think that question is for you, Dr. Sparso.
That's a big question. Well, I think there's a couple of pieces in that. Number one is just approaching everything like a team, right? Like, I'm not always the expert in the room, and the smartest person in the room is the room, and it's everybody's collective together. So really just listening to people and hearing what they want to say. I want to go back to what you said about culture, because culture is just not about different nationalities. There's a culture within every organization.
Yes.
And that culture is developed by the leaders. And so when you know that you have a diverse population, I've always worked in extremely diverse populations. And so you just have to be culturally aware and sensitive to the external people that are coming in as your people that you're serving. But as leaders, we have to remember we're also serving those who work for us, our staff. Mm-hmm. And so those interpreters, those translators, those teachers that are in the classroom, they've got to know that they have your support and that you're listening. And when things aren't working, you have to be responsive to that. So, and come back to it and admit when it's not working and just try to make it better. I mean, and there is no silver bullet for any of it, but just recognizing that you need all the people that you have. So, being aware of that internal culture and then the external culture that you're dealing with is so important. And having systems. That's the other thing that I would say is, when we went back to talking about the click sheets or the videos, that's your how-to. If people understand your how-to, then they can do it. If they don't have clarity around that, then you just get a lot of false starts or poor results.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sparacello. And thank you, Dr. Joseph, as well, for your comment here. All right, so let's move on. How can schools ensure equitable access to education for deaf and hard of hearing students and students with limited English proficiency, while also providing accurate and meaningful interpretation and translation services for their families? Liz?
Yeah, I do. I love that one. I think part of the ways that we can ensure that families are receiving information and that they are, 100% all in with you is touches kind of back to my answer for number one, that involvement, right? Are the parents involved? Are specifically with your deaf and hard of hearing parents, are they coming to the open house? Are they coming to parent teacher conferences? Did you tell them that there would be an interpreter? Symbol, just like this, put it on your paperwork, let them know. It's the sign for interpretation. And when a deaf person sees that, that means that they know that services are provided and you're welcome to make a request. And I think that's another thing. Teachers, we are so, well, when I was a teacher, we were so busy all the time. And, you hit your deadline before you even knew that it was the week of. And you're suddenly like, oh my gosh, having the time to ensure that those parents know that the event is happening and their service is available, and then making the request is hard. It is. It's really hard. But it's something that's super important because timing, we know every population that we work with has all kinds of different struggles. Everyone has something that they have to face every single day, whether it's childcare, having a car, having to go to work again. There's so many different things out there that our communities are facing on a daily basis that we know nothing about. So if you send out a notice for an IEP meeting and, that family doesn't have time to arrange childcare, or they don't have time to arrange, a ride, like that's for every single culture out there, whether they're, deaf or hearing and Hispanic or, everyone, Russian, it doesn't matter. We all have struggles. And if you don't have enough time to make your preparations, you're not going to be able to be involved the way that you want to. But offering a backup opportunity, just saying, hey, if you can't make it in person, let's do it virtually. That can be really helpful because of the things I just mentioned: transportation, childcare, having to go to work. Maybe they could take their lunch hour and come in and meet you virtually and then go back to work. Those are the kinds of things that we have to be able to work around to make sure that they can have, a full and enjoyable participation in the educational process. I hope I answered that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I think it feels very welcoming. To everything you're saying feels so welcoming. And if I were, and I am the daughter of immigrants, I know it would make my parents feel welcome to participate, understanding that someone is taking the time to make sure that they have a deaf and hard of hearing interpreter, an ASL interpreter, and whatever dialect in Africa the parents may speak. It feels very welcoming, and I would want to participate just because I know the services are there. Dr. Sparacello?
I would say a couple of things. One is as personalized as you can make it, right? That's very helpful. The handoff from year to year in a school, from third grade to fourth grade, when having that third grade teacher talk to that fourth grade teacher and say, this is this family and this is what they need, and this is this student and this is what they need. Even when I was in a very big district and had 800 freshmen coming in, I would have the dean from that middle school come over, and we talked about every single kid. It took us hours and days, but it was time well spent, because then going into the next year, we were prepared. If we were going to have an event, we knew what we needed to provide because we knew, who our families are. So, that communication is so important within, those grade levels, within the next, people who are passing people off to the next people. Also communicating with your parents and making sure that they're really aware of what is available to them, because some will just be like, I'm not coming. I'm not going to do this event because I'm not going to understand it anyway, or whatever. But when you can really reassure parents through that quality communication that there's going to be something available to them. And then the third thing I would say is just partnerships with organizations outside of, those that do interpretation and whatever. When I was at a private Catholic school, we partnered with the Sunshine School for the Deaf, because we did have some of their students that came over that they were trying to mainstream into the regular populations. They had their own deaf school, but then they had students they mainstreamed with us. And those partnerships are so valuable because you learn from them things that you otherwise might not be aware of. So you can be, kind of back to that idea of being culturally sensitive.
Yes. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Can
Trisha?
I just,
Yeah, go ahead, Liz.
sorry, I just, like, while Dr. Spiracello was talking, I was like, oh yeah, I thought of something. So, another thing that I think is really important is making sure that, you may think that the parent that you're communicating with every day when they come pick their kid up from school to have like, oh, it was such a good day, he did a great job, or she colored this beautiful picture for you, that pre-K, I taught pre-K for a while. So, that, what is, register, the register that you use when you're communicating with a parent on that level is very different than the register that you will use during an IEP meeting or a parent conference or, a disciplinary meeting, whatever it might be. It's a very different register. And while that back and forth, oh, such a good job, well, we had a great day, while that is comprehended, good to go, that does not mean that your IEP meeting doesn't need an interpreter, doesn't need a translated IEP. So that's something to consider too. The parent's comfort level, you may think, we're good, we got this. That does not mean that you got this, okay? That does not, a little bit of Spanish, that does not mean that you got this IEP meeting. There's legal stuff in there. Yes. Everybody has to be in agreement. Make sure you ask. If you're not sure, ask. It's not going to offend them for you to send home a letter that says in Spanish, hey, do you need an interpreter for this meeting? I'd be happy to provide someone. That's not going to offend them. That's going to make them feel, oh, wow, they really care. Yes. They
took the time.
Sorry, that just popped into my head, and it was something that, I ran into a lot in education, and I think it's super important to point out. So sorry.
And that goes along with like knowing your families, right? Because who to reach out to, who might not necessarily reach out to you. It's not their responsibility, it's ours.
Trisha?
Yeah, absolutely. That comment from Liz is really very true. And we have, systems where a family can enter their preferred language into, the student management system. And, we make them answer the question of what their language is like 16 different ways. So then a teacher goes in there and they're like, which one is it? I don't know. What language do they speak? And just, trying to take those steps prior to having conferences or an IEP meeting, Liz, is really important. For me, this question, again, with my lens and focus being on family engagement is I'd love to see us get to the point where we don't even separate them. There isn't one without the other. The families engaged in their students' education is how we ensure equitable access for these students. And so, really just not thinking of family engagement as an afterthought or an extra or something else. It's just what we do. And not making it into a big deal. So yes, you can have the carnival, you can have the family math night, and those are all really important events to have to build community in a school. But that isn't the definition of family engagement. It's what Liz was saying. It's your son or daughter did this today. It was great. You're on that personal level. It's the phone calls. It's the getting to know, them in small little bursts. And I think sometimes when we say family engagement, it feels big and hard. And I'd like to work on redefining that, where it really is all we're saying is, does this parent know what's happening in their child's school? And do they know who to ask if they have a question? And just lowering that bar and getting to the relationship part of family engagement versus the numbers of attendees coming.
Wonderfully
Preach.
said.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We have a question here from Heidi in a comment. She says, and I think she is talking about some of Liz's comments about offering virtual, for example. She says, that is true for almost all parents, but what if you have every working parent wanting to meet you virtually instead of coming in person? Will offering open the doors to parents not to show to this so needed meetings? I think it allows them to participate regardless of going on site or virtually. I think that many of the conversations and the important conversations that happen in the school with the parents can also happen virtually. What if the parent cannot show to the school because they've had an accident and they can't move, and then we're not able to provide this transportation? I think that's, opening the door to that as well. Or if mom is working from home and she cannot commute 30 minutes to the school or 40 minutes to the school, daddy has already wrapped up his work, and mom and dad, just take some time, 30 minutes to participate in the event or in the parent teacher meeting, for example. I think it opens a broad amount of doors.
One thing I will say too, from experience, is that offering that virtual option is not going to deter anyone
No.
from participating in their child's education. And that's the goal. So, it might make things easier, but, those parents that weren't going to come if it was in person, they're still not going to come, whether you offer them virtual or whether you don't offer virtual and you try to say, well, we really need you to come in person. It's not going to change their situation and their ability to get there.
Yes.
Whereas offering that virtual can open that door and start to bridge that relationship, and they suddenly can put a face to the name and they can see how much you care about their kid, and maybe that will push them to, I don't know, try to carpool with another parent, or, I don't know. Like I said, we all have really different life circumstances. Yeah.
Life situations. Yes.
So I think as many tools as we can get them out there.
Yes, absolutely. Alex is asking, do you believe that having internal bilingual team members to support and oversee outsourced language vendors is a smart strategy for improving quality and communication? It's a wonderful question.
That really is.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. I mean, having your own internal people that you trust is super important, I think.
I think, and above all that, making sure that we choose the right language service provider, that we make sure that the quality of interpreting service is up to par, that the interpreters are well trained, that they know their code of ethics and they know how to deal with children and they know how to deal with parents. I think that is also a very important thing. We've had situations in which there is a Spanish speaking person in the school, or the teacher is Spanish speaking, but she's not allowed to take over for the IEP. But she takes the time to let us know that the interpreter did a wonderful job. So I think they go together. Hopefully, if you guys are able to provide an internal staff member, all the feedback that you get is more positive than negative.
The other thing I would say about that is it also promotes confidence, because if you do have interpreters, translators out there making mistakes that are not getting caught,
Yes.
then it doesn't, it doesn't give your families confidence in you. And so just knowing that you're taking the time to make sure that what they're getting, whatever service they're getting, is a quality service, speaks to the quality of your organization. If you're just letting things slide, then it just does, it's not a good look.
As an interpreter, I can tell you that it makes me feel sad to even hear a comment from someone thinking that an interpreter is not going to do a great job, because not only are we paid to do that, but we sign a lot of documentation that makes us be well trained and provide the information as it is told. And also, the interpreters have tools to correct themselves. I've been interpreting and I render an information and then I say, you know what, that is not what the person said, and I go back and say the interpreter needs to make a correction. It is very easy to do that, and I believe it speaks more highly than what we may consider it does.
Well, and it can certainly be promoting or damaging to
Yeah, of
those
course.
relationships. We
Yes,
keep
of
talking
course.
about relationships, and that's part of it. Providing quality is part of maintaining a quality relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, just real quick, we have conversations a lot around what is the role of the interpreter versus, say, like a position we have here as a bilingual family liaison. And so we have people in our buildings as well as at the district that it's their job to advocate for the family and to teach the family, maybe about the education system or how things work here. And sometimes we're getting requests for interpreters when what they really want and need is our liaison to come and support this family.
Mm-hmm.
And they want the interpreter to be that person, and they can only interpret. And so we're working on defining what you really need in each situation.
Yes, that is true. All right, moving on to our fourth question. As the educational landscape evolves, what should schools and districts prioritize to maintain and improve their interpretation and translation services? With funding now being on the talks. You want to take that, Tricia?
Well, I just, I really think it's promoting my own position, but I do think it's that coordinator level. It's having one person that can manage it. If we didn't have me doing this now, it would all go away and we'd go back to, sort of pulling people from buildings. And so I do think that we have to understand the importance of the systems development piece. And sure, I would love to work myself out of a job and maybe we'll get there. But in the short term, we really need the systems development and the consistency and coordination. What we often find in schools, especially with tight budgets, is that we start something and then we stop, and then we start something and then we stop. And our staff and our families are like, I give up. I don't even know anymore if this is going to be available or not. So I think really thinking about what is the bare minimum that we need to keep that consistency.
Wow, very nicely said.
Yeah.
Doctor?
Oh, well, budget is like a 4-letter word to me right now.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. And I think everybody is going through, what we're going through in Texas right now with just legislative upheavals, national, concerns of parents. But I think from a leadership perspective, it's about making sure that, what you spend your money on is what you value. That's the bottom line. So, making sure that it's in your strategic plan, that it's in your priorities, and that it's in your budget. You have to start there, because if you don't plan for it, it won't happen. And I agree that there's so much stop and start in education with programs, and we get a new technology or a new thing and we get wowed by it and let's try that. But really evaluating what is working and keeping that and prioritizing it and making sure that you are aligning your goals and your strategies and your funding. All three have to be there. And then follow that with proper training of people to make sure, and proper monitoring. Like it's a cyclical thing. And if you have a good strategic plan that is well funded, then those cycles complete themselves and you see results. But you have to prioritize it, and it has to be a stated goal. Like, this is who we are. This is what we do. Because I think for some people, it's like, it's this background thing, but it's got to be a priority, and everybody's got to understand what the priority is and what it looks like in action, and fund it and monitor it.
Yes. One thing I'd like to add, is when we're talking about funding, it's all about data, right? We want to know what do you mean you need this? What does it look like? I want to see it on paper. I want to see all that beautiful graphs that show me what kind of usage we currently have, what schools are using it, what is the volume that is, daily or monthly, whatever that might be. The data will always prove this is what we need. We had, 15 parents come to a meeting when we told them that there would be an interpreter there for them. They showed up. When we did not tell them there was an interpreter, they did not show up. There we go. Data like that is super helpful, especially when you're talking to the higher ups, the ones that are making those decisions and deciding where that funding is going to go. I mean, if it's an afterthought, which usually it is, it can't be. We can't allow that to happen. We have to keep it at the forefront. Like you said, it has to be a priority. And another thing I was going to mention, is the country as a whole is becoming more and more linguistically diverse. There's communities that have never even experienced needing an interpreter or using an interpreter, and suddenly they have an influx of people that need services. And so being flexible, being aware, and like Trisha said, to piggyback on what you said, your position is exactly what they need. When those schools start to see the students come in that are speaking a language that they've never worked with before, that's when they need to call in an expert, because they're just going to keep coming. They're going to keep coming. It's not going to just suddenly be like, oh, we got 5 of them there. That's it. We're good. No, that's not it anymore. They're coming. Let's go. Let's get our act together. Let's help them so that they can be involved in the education of their children.
Yes.
And so that their children know what's going on.
Right.
Yes. Lovely said, ladies. Okay. I think Heidi is probably commenting about the previous question we asked. She says a Spanish speaker staff member does not ensure that the interpretation is done accurately. They should be trained to be able to do that. I agree with that. But I think we were probably Dr. Was focusing more on having maybe interpreting staff that can supervise the interpretation services that they have contracted. But that is absolutely true, Heidi. I 100% agree with you. Okay, ladies, this is our last question here. How are recent changes, oh boy, in language access policies and immigration trends shaping the need for interpretation and translation services in education? And what should schools do to stay prepared? Deep one. Very deep and sensitive one.
It is.
Liz, you want to go ahead?
I think that this goes back to what I was saying. This is English may be the designated language. However, other languages exist. Other languages will continue to exist, and people that need services will continue to come. One thing that was mentioned in a meeting that we had with some subject matter experts that represent healthcare systems, something that someone said was, well, the things are changing. Policies are being made, executive orders are being sent out, but that specific person, these people who we're still responsible for their care. We're still responsible for these students and their test scores. We're still responsible for the parent engagement. We're still responsible with communicating with these families. And if we're not doing it properly, we're not going to see the numbers that we want, the numbers that we need. We're not going to see the participation that we want to see. We're not, it's going to be very clear that we're not doing it. And I think that, we as a community, we as education systems need to keep your ear to the ground.
Mhm.
You've got to be ready. You've got to know what's out there, and you have to make sure that you have something lined up, even if you don't need it right now. You never know when a family of deaf people is going to move to your community and you're suddenly going to need a sign language interpreter for every meeting. You never know. So you should have resources and be prepared and be ready for when that family does come, when the Somali family moves in, when someone comes that needs Braille even. I mean, keep your ear to the ground, keep your resources at hand, and be ready to reach out when you need it, and make sure your teams know how to get it too.
There is no way education for a child would be successful without involving their parents. And many of the parents, talking about maybe the 4 states that are on this call, New Jersey, Ohio, Texas, and Washington, the diversity of spoken languages is tremendous. So, what are we going to see in the near future if, all these changes do take place? Education levels are going to start going down. Parents are not, the students are going to struggle. The parents are going to struggle. So, I think we have to focus on that part of success, which also adds to the future of our country. We are preparing leaders, we're preparing doctors, we're preparing engineers. And so we would want to make sure that their basic education is up to par. Doctor?
This has been a rough semester, I'm not going to lie. And I've had parents who are very scared, to be quite honest. So for me, I find it imperative that you're up to date on what is going on in the world around you and that you're being responsive to it and communicating to your parents. Because, like I said, we had just some parents who just weren't even going to bring their children to school at all.
Yes.
And so that communication has got to be there, that cultural sensitivity, the relationships with parents so that they trust you is so important. We are trying to do everything that we can to give confidence to our parents that we are here for you regardless. And I know, we've mentioned Spanish a lot on here in Texas. Of course, that is a big language for us, but I have been in a district where we had 29 different documented languages.
Oh, yes.
And so, many, many dialects, or different organizations bringing in students from African, countries and from South American countries that have very distinct dialects that might be a version of Spanish, but not completely Spanish as we in Texas speak it. We have our own version here anyway. So, it's just so important to stay abreast of what's going on, to be responsive to it, not to ignore it, to communicate about it. And then to, as you were saying earlier, like know what your resources are so that you're not scrambling when you do need to provide something, that you're on the ready.
Thank you so much. Tricia?
Yeah, I think in our strategic plan, one of our biggest focuses is on creating a culture of safety and belonging in our buildings, and the data that's showing that when we have that, it does positively impact student academic outcomes. And so I think for what schools can really focus on to stay prepared, in addition to knowing their resources, is keeping it focused on those individual relationships and knowing their families, knowing what they need, not making assumptions. There's a lot of assumptions happening right now.
Yes.
And then what our equity department is doing is really just like stopping the work they kind of were in the middle of, and focusing 100% on these anti-bias trainings. So they're creating materials for students and staff, as well as going to all the schools and doing trainings for students and staff overall on general anti-bias, because we've had a lot of issues with student to student harm, just as it relates to some of the executive orders and some of the policies coming down. And so really trying to kind of be on that ground level and focus on hate and harm and language, and some of those core values of being human.
Yes.
Treating
That
each
breaks
other
my heart.
with dignity and respect. Yeah.
I think we're so able to be sensitive to this subject because of just the level of involvement that we have with different cultures. And I think a lot would be different if other people could probably open their eyes and I don't want to say hearts, but open their hearts to what this nation is of.
Yes.
And it truly breaks my heart. And I, as a language service provider and as an interpreter, I can tell you that we are doing everything in our power to advocate for the people that have these type of needs, not only for the spoken, but also the deaf and hard of hearing community and other vulnerable communities that will be affected by many of these changes. And these people are also Americans, and these people have every right to communicate. And so I am hoping that things change in the very near future, and that the consequences of whatever changes want to be made are seen, not, taking place, but someone has the vision of what may happen, and that we all pay attention to that. I want to take this opportunity to thank the three of you for participating in this roundtable. Hearing you speak was wonderful for me. Your The ways that you guys communicated was wonderful. I know we have other comments here. Dr. Joseph has been very active, Heidi, Alex. So I want to thank them as well for joining us, and the rest of you that joined us on LinkedIn. I will see the three of you on LinkedIn. Liz, I talk to you every day. So
Thank you
thank you so
guys.
much for your time.
Oh,
This
thank
was
you.
wonderful. And I'm
Awesome
hoping we did,
conversation.
yes, and I'm hoping we
Thank
did
you so
open
much.
a lot of eyes and ears out there in some of these subjects. All right, everyone, have a great afternoon. For those of us who celebrate Easter, happy Easter. Take care.
Bye, everybody. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.